All right, we are live and getting ready to go as people pile in here, joined by Austin Gayle of The Ringer. Austin, thank you for joining us, my man. Last time we had you on about a year ago, you were with a different company, and now you're with another company, both of which we quite enjoy around here. So we appreciate you joining us. How are you, man?
Doing good. Last time I saw you guys, Combine, right? We saw each
That's
other
right.
in
Yeah, we
Indy,
hung
and
out one night at the
then
combine.
yeah, that was a good time.
It was a good time, and we're talking receivers today, which should be another good time because that's always an exciting topic during the draft season. This year, kind of a different class than we've seen in the past couple of years. Maybe a little bit of a treasure hunt if you're looking for the right guy. So I think it just makes it more of a challenge, really, trying to find the talent here or there. And as we go, I feel like this is the case with every skill position. As we go through the draft season, you get at the beginning like, well, this wide receiver class is not anything compared to the last couple of classes. And then whether it is or not, we delude ourselves by the end into thinking that there's a lot of really great talent. That maybe there is. I'm sure that there is somewhere, right? Somebody's going to be a stud in this class. It's just a matter of who and where. So we're doing our top 10 wide receivers in this class. We'll go through both your and my lists. You've got your top 10 ready to go?
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. So let's start. We can start at the bottom here. Were there any guys that didn't quite make your top 10 that you would just be remiss without mentioning? Anybody that you're just like, oh, this guy is a day 3 guy, but I really like the upside.
It's tough, right? I had a bucket of these guys that probably are day 3 types right outside my top 10, but you could argue fit into the top 10. A.T. Perry, Wake Forest, I had here
Mm,
at 11. I like him a lot. I think
me too.
that in a class of a lot of small guys, there's a world where I can see myself talking into him being a top 10, receiver in this class. I also really like Rashee Rice. And then there are some plays where I hate
Mm-hmm.
Rashee Rice.
Yeah.
Tyler Scott of Cincinnati, I know is someone I'm lower on than other people. I think
Mm,
that he's right outside my top 10. But I do really like him. Jonathan Mingo is someone who's outside my top 10, but I don't love him. I think that Mingo athletically is someone that people will covet, but on
yep.
tape is not there yet for me. Someone I can't get my head around, Trey Palmer. I don't love Trey Palmer. I think
Mm,
Trey Palmer, his tape at Nebraska did not wow me the same way his athleticism wows me. I think Mingo and Palmer I view similarly. And then the two small guys with alliteration going, Trey Tucker, Darius Davis. It's like, okay, slot only types that have the
yeah.
scheme touches. I'm fine taking these guys on day 3, but they probably can't fit into my top 10 either. That's like this bucket of all guys I've watched, all guys I've heard the hype around, but can't really get to seeing them as top 10 players in this class.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of guys. The one that you mentioned in particular, Mingo, he keeps climbing up and up a lot of boards, and I think it really is on paper. There's a lot to love there. It's just on tape.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a buddy who was an Ole Miss beat writer for the majority of his time there, and we asked him at the combine, like, hey, what are your thoughts on Mingo? And he said he's great on paper, and then you watch the tape, and if you have watched Ole Miss at all, you don't want your team probably taking him because maybe he can't
Mm-hmm.
catch super well and is kind of up and down. The guys for me that I left off of my top 10, there's 3 that I love and 1 I really don't love. The one that is on a lot of people's boards that I just don't understand what the love is, and it sounds like he might be on yours since you didn't mention him, and I'm curious to
Mm-hmm.
see if we talk about him. It's Tank Dell out of Houston. I just don't. To me, he's not athletic enough to overcome the size shortcomings. And on tape, he didn't do anything that really wowed me. So he's kind of outside of my top 10. And then some of those guys that you mentioned, Rashee Rice is just outside of the 10 for me. Jaden Reed from Michigan State. I think there's a lot of things to like there. And if you're looking for somebody with a little bit of size, he could be a value add. Michael Wilson from Stanford. I think there's a lot on tape to like about him. I just don't know
Mm-hmm.
how much of a project he's going to be at the next level. So that with that being said, we've established the guys that just missed the cut. Let's get into our top 10 real quick for those of us that are joining us. For those of you that are joining us live, if you have any comments, questions, go over to Broadway Sports Media on YouTube and you can leave your comments and questions there in the chat. If you have anything you want to ask Austin, now is the time. So, Austin, who is your 10th wide receiver?
10th, I had, let me go back to my list here. Number 10, I put Marvin Mims Jr. of
Okay.
Oklahoma. I like Marvin Mims. He's
Mm-hmm.
rose up in the process for me.
Totally.
I like the idea of all the guys I could kind of dial up scheme touches for. I think Mims Jr. does the most with it. I like his yards after the catch ability. I like how sure-handed he is. I like that he's played in multiple systems. I think he is someone that when you find other scouts or other people in your room in this theoretical green room talking all about him, I think there's so many reasons to draft him and not enough to not draft him. And I think that's why I see him as this maybe round 3 guy that maybe gets drafted up into round 2 because of positional value. And he's one that just edges out, Tank Dell for me. I didn't mention Tank Dell in this tier of receivers that I have, but Tank Dell, I think, is like, if not 11, he's 10B. I think the comp I gave for him and is a more polished Marquise Brown. I think you see some Marquise Brown in him, in that he's small, razor thin, probably should play in the slot, but still finds ways, like from a route running perspective, to get open and create separation. Tank Dell is like 10B right after Marvin Mims, because it's hard to bet on an outlier like Tank Dell, but I think Marquise Brown was overdrafted in terms of where he was positioned. And I think Tank Dell might be a day 2 type. If he falls to day 3, you're working with a lot of good receiver things, like on tape things that you want your receiver to be. It's just getting past the weight and getting past, like, obviously the height outliers.
Yeah, at 5'11", 183, he's a relatively young guy, but the size is the biggest concern with him. I agree. He's risen up a lot of boards, and I feel like the draft community might be a little bit higher. The mock draft community might be a little bit higher on him than the NFL is, and I'm kind of wondering why that is. I don't know if you caught wind of on Move the Sticks with Daniel Jeremiah last week. He said he keeps asking folks in the league that he has as sources, what are your thoughts on Mims? And he keeps just getting kind of shrugs, and he feels like he's taking crazy pills. I kind of feel the same way. If this guy falls into day 3, I will be shocked. If he falls really far into day 2, I'll be kind of surprised. There's a lot on tape that I really liked about him. It really just is that size concern. But yeah, he's got decent contested catch numbers despite the size shortcomings. Not a really significant drop issue in college by any means, was effective in the red zone. So I liked him a good bit. On my board, he was my 9th guy. Let me mention my 10th guy, Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati, because you said you weren't huge on him. He's really popular in these parts with Tennessee Titans folks, because the Titans have a lot of love for him. It sounds like Mike Vrabel has a pretty deep connection to Cincinnati because his BFF coached there for a long time. I think he's a good receiver that's going to be a day 2 pick for sure. He continues to climb up the boards. What on tape did you see from him that you weren't crazy about? I'm curious what the downsides were for you.
I don't know how much of it is tape as much as it's another size outlier, right?
Issue.
I think he came in at like 5'9", 177. And okay, how many fast small guys are in this freaking class? Like, there's
17,000.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that I can talk myself into him. He's also small and fast. I can talk myself into him. He's also small.
It's just a bunch of shrimps, man.
At a certain point, it's like a scarcity, question where it's like, this is not a scarce resource in this draft. Yeah. You can go find other guys. And where I think what would separate Tyler Scott for me, and something that obviously we're not as closely a part of, is like some of the interview process, right? It's hearing from a Tyler Scott and hearing from a Darius Davis and hearing from a Trey Tucker and all the differences between all of these other fast, small receivers, and then having that be the edges. I think that why you see Scott from like NFL personnel have like these like high day 2 grades, round 2 grades, is not just because of the athleticism, but I think it's also someone that is like performing really, really well in the interview process. People are liking that part of it as well. I have no problem with people who view him as a top 10 receiver. It's just, you can go down the list on how many Tyler Scott types.
It gets cookie cutter really fast. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So who did you have at 9?
My number 9 in this class, and I think I'm going to be the highest on this guy of anybody. You could surprise me. Michael Wilson of Stanford. I know the injuries are scary.
You're not higher than Chris Sims. Chris Sims thinks he's a top 5 receiver in this class, but then you're number 2. You're number 2.
Michael Wilson is freaking awesome. I have in my notes here. Give me the sharpness in his route tree, the quickness, the suddenness, the movement skills all day. I know. He's only played like a handful of snaps in his career. He's going to have injury concerns. He's a little bit of a smaller, like stockier frame. Like, I think he's viewed more like a running back. He was listed at 6'2" at Stanford, but nowhere near that, obviously, when he measured in.
Right.
I don't love how inconsistent he is. And that's both from an availability perspective, and also I feel like his hands can be inconsistent at times. But like, his best plays are up there with the best plays of the top receivers in this class. I think Michael Wilson. Yep. Michael Wilson has it. And you saw that at the Senior Bowl. You see that on his tape. I think everyone who has not watched Michael Wilson, go turn on the Washington tape. This dude was putting on an absolute clinic against Washington. I think it's some of the best receiver tape of any of these players in this class. The only reason you're probably low on him is injuries and obviously not at the top of the testers, and there's some size stuff there. But like, man, you tell me you can get Michael Wilson in 10 games a year and you're going to get that suddenness and that quickness. He's someone that I think can win on the outside despite the frame, all of that stuff. He's a guy I'm willing to bet on.
He's a guy, as I go through these receivers, every time I watch his tape, I find myself moving him up the board just a little bit by a little bit, because you're right. If it weren't for the fact that he only I'm looking here, he's only played 14 games over the past 3 seasons, like definitely concerning. But if you, like you said, if you can get him for 10 games a year, the tape is there. I think he's a relatively polished player. In the games that he did play in, like you mentioned, he had a massive impact. And although he wasn't going up against the best talent in the world, again with Stanford, I definitely can see his game translating to the NFL. And if you are looking for a guy with a little bit more size, he's not the biggest dude in this class, but compared to the average of the top talent, he's certainly bigger than a lot of these guys we've mentioned. So I don't hate that at all. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about your number 8. I guarantee it's not my number 8, which we'll mention in a second, because it's A.T. Perry, who I really, really like, and we'll talk about that briefly. But,
I'm all here for A.T. Perry love.
Okay.
I love A.T. Perry.
All right. Well,
I think A.T. Perry's great. I think it's tough. It's tough.
Let's talk about him then.
To fit. Go ahead. Give me your A.T. Perry love.
Well, so it's the tape for me. His size combined with his footwork is kind of insane. I think that he's a really polished guy in that way. I'm trying to pull up his numbers here. JT, do you have his numbers in front of you?
Yeah, I can get him in a second.
Okay, because I know he's like 6'3", 200 pounds, a little bit on the older side, but on tape, you just see a guy that I think his game is going to translate really well and pretty quickly to the NFL. And it really is a scarcity thing. Like you mentioned, the inverse of the small, fast slot only maybe kind of guy in this class, of which there are plenty. There really are just a handful of guys at this level in terms of their size. And in the NFL, I still do think size wins. I mean, coming from a guy who covers the Tennessee Titans, I've been watching a lot of Treylon Burks and A.J. Brown and Corey Davis in the past couple of years. And I know that that's the kind of size that you can use well in the NFL, and in the right scheme, it can be kind of deadly. So that's intoxicating enough to me to put him in my top 10. What were your thoughts on him when you watched him?
I really did like the tape. I thought the tape was fantastic. I think he consistently gets open. There's a lot of experience there. There's size there. I'd be interested to hear who you had as comps for him. I feel that my comps I wrote down, Josh Reynolds is someone that I think he plays very similar to. I think Josh Reynolds.
That was my only comp, and the only reason why is because he stopped through Tennessee for 10 seconds a couple of years ago, and then got out of town. But I'm like, that's kind of who this guy is to me. Yeah. Josh
Reynolds, I think, is like honestly probably his like average comp. If it was a range of
50%
distribution, I think that's where he could probably hit, and where the concerns with Josh Reynolds is he's not sudden, right? And like when you're not sudden, when you don't have that immediate clicks, it's very hard to consistently win. However, reliability, catch radius, sure-handedness, all that stuff has allowed for Josh Reynolds to have this kind of longer career. Someone else I put in probably more on like the ceiling comps area, and he's a little bit of an older guy, Sidney Rice, who played for Minnesota, played for Seattle for a little bit.
Yeah.
Bigger bodied receiver. I think he was 6'4", 200 pounds, 4.5s guy. Sidney Rice played in the league, though, where size was still coveted. There were a lot less small, fast receivers in that version of the NFL than there are now.
Sure.
Like, I don't know how much Sidney Rice, I'm not saying he doesn't see the field, but like his skill set isn't as coveted as it was 10 years ago, right? Or even 15, 20 years ago. So teams that like size and teams that covet the Reynolds types in their basketball team of receiving cores, that expression that gets overused at this point, they're going to like A.T. Perry. But teams that are like Miami, the Giants to some degree with how they built that receiver room, they're going to be like, or even like I think the Niners to some degree, they're going to look at A.T. Perry and be like, no thanks. Like we want fast, we want sudden, we want speed, yak, break tackles. However, there are teams I still think that covet A.T. Perry's skill set, that Reynolds type, that like bucket getter, that I think teams will kind of chase.
Yeah. So who did you have as your wide receiver 8?
My wide receiver 8, and this guy honestly has been talked up to me. At first, I didn't love him. My initial comp for him was Tylan Wallace with more speed, and Tylan Wallace I think is not managed to see the field maybe as much as you'd like, but I did really like him coming out of OK State. This is Jaden Reed out of Michigan State.
Yeah.
Tylan Wallace, when you turn on the OK State tape, he was a guy that, he's small, but he catches everything through contact. Like any time he's being contacted, you're seeing him come down with the football. He's a big contested catch guy. middle of the pack suddenness, middle of the pack, separation, but someone that you just felt every single time was going to come down with the football. I think you saw that with Jayden Reed. Going back to Jayden Reed's 2021 tape versus Michigan, that one loss that Michigan had was insane. Like, he had so many of the spectacular plays that Michigan State needed to win that football game. Obviously, Kenneth Walker gets all the love because I think he had like 3 touchdowns, 250 yards in that game. But like, Jayden Reed in the 2021 tape against Michigan, against really good secondary players, I thought was phenomenal. I think he's carried some of that with horrendous quarterback play at Michigan State. Michigan State has not had the guys under center to put up numbers as a pass catcher, and he's still managed to do that. I think Jayden Reed is going to have a better NFL career than he had a college career. And when you slot him in, I won't say the other guys I have in this tier, but when you slot him into this tier, even with the guys I mentioned below, Michael Wilson, Marvin Mims, the A.T. Perrys, the Tank Dells, you're betting on he's not that big, but there's things he's done at the college level that if he can try and mirror it in the NFL, you're going to have a productive player. I like taking those swings on guys in this range.
Yeah, Jayden Reed, I think there is a lot to like, and our guy Zach Lyons says Jayden Reed, Hive, stand up. He's a guy who here in town has written a lot about guys that would fit well with the Titans, and I think this is a guy that absolutely would fit well with the Titans, like Zach laid out here. He screams Titans wide receiver. He is kind of a niche guy, like A.T. Perry. I'm not sure he's going to be for everyone, but his kind of versatile skill set, I absolutely agree, could work well in the NFL. And he is one of those guys that when you watch him on tape, I agree with you that you can see a little bit more NFL to their game than college maybe. And you're right that in Michigan State, he was kind of playing maybe with one hand tied behind his back at times. So I don't hate that at all. And in terms of value, where this guy ends up going, I mean, if you can get this guy on day 3, you are so happy, because this is going to be a guy that is going to be an impact relatively quickly, I think.
For me, and why I think this receiving class, there's 2 reasons why this receiving class, I think in media and also like in the NFL, will be kind of pushed up. It's one, it's a valuable position. Every team needs a receiver. We saw that with the trades for Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and A.J. Brown last year. Like, teams need high-end, high-caliber receiving talent to be, deep postseason contenders. It's a valuable position. It's one of the highest paid positions in the league.
Right.
2, why it's also prioritized in media is obviously it's a sexy position, one that's fun to scout, one that's fun to look at and draw numbers to and look at athleticism to and all those things.
Well, the average guy can look at a receiver and say, good, not good.
Exactly.
It's really easy.
Exactly. Yeah. Realistically, Jayden Reed is 5'10", 187 pounds. It's very difficult, or almost 5'11". It's very difficult to win the NFL when you are that small. I think weight is the most under-discussed thing with receiver. After that, it's arm length. And if you do not get into the 50, 60, 70th percentile of those 2 things, weight and arm length, it is hard to win in the NFL as an outside receiver. And I think that's important as well. I know 3 receivers start generally for teams, right? A lot of 11 personnel in the NFL today. Outside receiver versus slot receiver is a different game. You obviously see a higher percentage of press coverage at outside receiver, and also you're asked to run a completely different route tree. Slot receiver, obviously see less press, given more free releases, running more underneath stuff, all of that stuff kind of changes. To play outside receiver, which maybe you're drafting a Jayden Reed to be, it's what he did at Michigan State, hard to do with his arm length and his weight, right? It's hard. And I think that from there are going to be a lot of teams, if not most teams, like slot-only player for Jayden Reed, slot-only player for Tank Dell, slot-only player even for Zay Flowers, who I'm sure we'll talk about later, slot-only for Josh Downs, slot-only for all of these guys that do not have the weight, do not have the height, do not have the arm length requirements to be outside receivers. At that point, wouldn't be surprised if few receivers do end up going in these spots that we suggested.
That's a great point. You accidentally sort of answered a question that we'd gotten here from Jacob Sane, who says the general sense I've gotten from media is that this is a quote unquote weak wide receiver class because it lacks star power, but it certainly feels like a deep class with a lot of mid-round value. I think there is maybe more value to be had in this receiver class all in all in the second and third days. Because there are some guys that you like you like a trait or you like the tape, and they just maybe not be the complete package in terms of their college profile, but they work well in the NFL. Would you classify this as a weaker wide receiver class? Maybe weaker than recent ones we've had, but while the top might be a little bit smaller than folks like, I'm not sure it's necessarily as weak as we once thought it may be.
I don't know. It's tough.
It's just a different class to me. I think it's
a different class, and you're betting on a lot of outliers. I think Ben Solak recently did a video on the Ringer YouTube channel talking about.
Yeah, I watched it. It was a great video.
Exactly. This year we had, I think, 9 or 10 receivers that weighed under 190 pounds come to the combine, the most in the last 21 years or whatever it was. That in general makes it objectively a weaker class. You have smaller guys. You have smaller guys, and it's hard with that many small guys, and not all of them are 4.2 burners, right? You have small guys that are running in the low 4.4s to high 4.4s range. The league doesn't ask for that. The league is looking for big and fast. And when you don't have that, it's hard to say that this position group at large is a stronger group, right? You have guys that you like, and I'm happy to talk myself into a Rashee Rice. I'm happy to talk myself into some of these guys at the depths of the receiving class. But I also know when you're looking at the range of outcomes, there's a good reason why these guys won't pan out, right? Every guy probably after after Jackson Smith-Njigba, it is very easy to say, this is why maybe he won't work out. This is why, yeah, exactly. Whereas in previous
and even
classes,
JSN, you can be like, remember that time he had a hamstring and missed an entire season?
Exactly. And then you have, when you look at previous classes, it was hard to figure out why Jamar Chase was not going to pan out. And even with Devontae Smith, and he had his weight concerns, it's like, dude, this guy has done it at the hardest level possible. The testing is there, won the Heisman at receiver, which you rarely see. Those classes, it's incomparable.
The thing for me, and we could talk about this all day long, but the thing for me that the countervailing point to that, and I'll play a little devil's advocate here, it is kind of tricky to maybe project the marrying of a change in the NFL as to what works at wide receiver. Because I think we do see a league today in which, it used to be a bad thing in the NFL draft. Oh, he's slot only. Well, okay. Cooper Kupp, slot only, right? Like, you got guys who have body types. So Tyreek Hill is a slot only body type, but he's a freaky difference maker. And yes, you're not necessarily finding your Tyreek Hill in this draft. There's a speed element there that you don't necessarily have. But I do think that as the NFL shifts away from pure size dominance, and yes, I still think size wins. Absolutely. I've already said it once on this show. I do think we see teams opening their mind up a little bit to, so what, he's slot only. Maybe he's amazing in the slot and he's still going to tear you to shreds, and we don't mind that.
Mm-hmm. I think that my response to that is you can only have so many slot only players in your locker room, right? Or in your receiving room.
And now you do have to consider the
I agree.
Right?
I agree that slot only players have value, but not at the same volume that inside outside versatility has.
And not if you have only four only slot guys on your team, right?
Exactly. I mean, look at the New York Giants. The New York Giants don't even know how they're going to field outside receivers with who they have on that roster. It's like, when you can bring in guys that have the size, weight requirements to play inside and outside with maybe limitations that these slot only types are faster or whatever, it's easier to talk yourself into that room than it is with guys that have specific skill sets. I was on a hit earlier today and I was like, Kadarius Toney's electric. I would hate to have a receiving room with only Kadarius Toney's. I can't win with that. I need guys that can go get a bucket. I need guys that can go win as outside receivers consistently, do the polished necessities of the receiver position that win in this league versus having, Kadarius Toney, an electric player with the ball in his hands. It's hard to scheme that many touches to a room of all those guys.
All right, let's keep trucking along here. Who is your wide receiver 6 in this draft?
Wide receiver 6.
7. We skipped 7.
7.
Yeah.
That's right. I have Josh Downs here. And Downs, to me...
Lower than me. I want to know what you don't like about him.
Yeah. For me, Josh Downs, another small receiver, right?
Totally. Yep.
Percentile height, 2nd percentile weight.
Not great.
Narrowly beats out the 30-inch arm threshold that I look at for outside receivers. 12th percentile arm length. Right then and there, you have to be phenomenal. You have to be Dotson level of catch radius, Dotson level. And I bring up Dotson only because that's a smaller receiver that I was lower on coming out that I think proved me wrong in a lot of ways, in that the route running is still holding up and his catch radius is still holding up.
Right.
That you have to be that good with those limitations in size to succeed in the league. And I can't bet on that, man. When I got Trey Tucker right down the line, when I got Tank Dell right down the line, I can get another small guy in here. And that to me, again, comes back to the interview process. It comes back to the medical history. There have to be other factors because there's too many of these guys that are Downs types in that uber productive college players, small, fast, slot only is probably in the NFL. Why, if I have to take Josh Downs in the top 50 selections of this draft, and I can take a Darius Davis, a Trey Tucker, a Tyler Scott in round 3, round 4, you really need to convince me why I should make that change. And it has to be either in the interview room or it has to be in the medicals or whatever. It has to be in these different areas.
So it's a value proposition for you, which I can totally understand. The thing for me, it's funny that you mentioned Dotson because he was a guy that I wasn't crazy about. I thought that drafting him in the first round last year was a pretty ridiculous thing to do. And then he proved us wrong, obviously. maybe this is me just swinging too far back in the other direction. He's my wide receiver 5 in this class, just because in terms of the shrimp, outside of maybe the Zay Flowers, who I think is a little bit different and is higher on my board, he is the top guy for me. Getting to see him at the combine, the dude is just he's walking through water with how fluid his movement is. I think that his hands are fantastic. I think that his footwork is really, really great. Yeah, I don't see him being great outside of the slot. I think you could use him as a flanker relatively effectively, but he's certainly not going to be an outside guy at the next level. I am thinking that if I'm going to bet on one of these small slot only ish guys in this draft class, he's that guy for me. So that's just the guy I'm willing to go out on a limb for. Who's your wide receiver 6?
This is another guy I think I'm too high on. I'm going to come back and I'm going to be like, why was I too high on this guy? And it's Cedric Tillman at 10.
No. You're not too high. No.
I love Cedric Tillman.
He's my 6 too. I love Cedric Tillman.
In a class where everyone's small, he's big. 6'3", 213, long arms, almost 33-inch arms, something to look for. Big hands, 10-inch hands. And he's not super slow. 10-yard split, you'd like it to be a little bit faster. 4.54 40-yard dashes, I think was he ran, which is only 0.06 of a second off of what Josh Downs run, who is being obviously a smaller type and 170, literally 40 pounds lighter, running only that much slower is something where Tillman, as hard as it is to evaluate Jalen Hyatt, it's equally hard to evaluate Tillman because he was not asked to run an NFL route tree.
Yep.
But
that whole team is impossible to evaluate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what he does have is NFL size, and I think NFL pass catching ability. He's going to be a plus blocker in the NFL. Give me Cedric Tillman, and I think it's between him and Jalen Hyatt is so much closer than people think. It is not Hyatt round 1.
Austin, I tweeted
Tillman
out this morning, happy Monday morning. I think Cedric Tillman is a better NFL prospect than Jalen Hyatt. Hope you have a great day, which in this part of the country, not a great thing to necessarily say because the Tennessee fans love them some Jalen Hyatt.
For sure.
But what I'm betting on is we've seen how many times have we seen a guy who had an amazing penultimate year in college and then injuries kept them away from our eyeballs in their last season. And then they fall on the board a little bit farther than they should. And then we're like, oh, this is that guy that we were projecting to be a really, really nice top level pick in the NFL draft. And he just wasn't available as much in his final year. I think if Jalen Hyatt didn't exist, then Cedric Tillman would be significantly higher on folks' boards. And he is, to me, the last vestige of, if you're looking for a guy with a little size, this is the last stop on day 1 and day 2. Because I really do think, do you have a comp for him? Because to me, I see a lot of a lower end, not great scenario. And these are both Titans comps is a little Justin Hunter-y.
Okay.
But I think if he works out, you could see a little bit more of a Corey Davis kind of guy. I think his ceiling is a great wide receiver too. I don't see him necessarily leading a team, but I think that he could be, if you have somebody that is that true X ball winner on your team, I think that he could be that guy for you.
I have Mohamed Sanu, and I don't think people love Mohamed Sanu's career, but again, consistent, physical, big bucket getter, could go reliable. And I think those are traits that you are few and far between. Like you said, you got Quentin Johnston. Then I think you have Cedric Tillman as this next big guy. And then maybe you're looking down at A.T. Perry as other guys that maybe fit that mold. Everyone else, when you go down the line, is speed. Maybe there is some reliability there and just smaller frames, right? Guys that you probably want playing in the slot. So Mohamed Sanu is not the sexy Hall of Fame comp that people chase during this draft process, but that's kind of who he reminded me of.
I have no problem with that at all. I love me some Mohamed Sanu, and also Cedric Tillman. I agree with that wholeheartedly. He's someone that I've watched the most recent out of anyone. And I know it's the fun thing to go watch the 2021 tape on Cedric Tillman because of what happened last year with the injury and whatnot. And it's hard to evaluate him, like you said, with what route tree he runs. But man, if he could do it once in 2021, I would have no problem using a late second, early 3 on Cedric Tillman.
The thing for me trying to differentiate between these two Tennessee receivers is, both in terms of the scheme that they were in, it's impossible to project to the NFL. But whose traits, whose game do I think works better as an NFL projection? And to me, every time I ask myself that question, it's Cedric Tillman. You said they're so close. Is Hyatt your next guy?
Hyatt's my next guy.
Okay, let's talk about him then.
He's in the tier below my top 4, and I think there's a considerable gap between the top 4 that I have in this tier because
I agree.
This tier of Hyatt, Tillman, Downs, Reed, and then even bringing in Michael Wilson, Marvin Mims, you're getting to a point where fit matters so much. Like, do we have the skill set currently in our locker room? Is there a path to the football field to where he can continue to improve? And do we have a receiving coach and offensive coordinator and head coach that's going to buy this guy at his strengths and his weaknesses? And if like, because the guys in the top 4, they have eliteness in their game that like you can almost ignore their weaknesses. What was it? Bucky Brooks had said to me once, I think he said this a handful of times, don't tell me what he can't do, tell me what he can do. And like with Hyatt, Tillman, Downs, Reed, it's so easy to say what you can do. Jaden Reed, contested catches, Josh Downs, speed, smooth, fluid, all that stuff. Cedric Tillman, big, physical, Hyatt, speed. But when you get into what he can't do, what these guys have limitations of, there's a lot to list. And I think with Hyatt, I haven't seen him on the full route tree. Everyone's going to bring up Corey Coleman out of Baylor when he was running the same damn stuff and he was drafted very highly and then didn't make it. There's a lot of stuff not off field with Corey Coleman, but like the presence in the locker room and the coachability with Corey Coleman, I think led to where he was at. When you get to guys that can't do limitations, and I bring this up maybe more than other analysts do, but like the interviews matter, man. The interviews are what separates you. It's like when I was at the combine, I was kind of working together on a piece of the ringer talking about where are these like thresholds for players, right? Does he have to have 30-inch arms? Does he have to have 210 pounds to play this certain position? Mm-hmm. And what was time and time again brought up with GMs and with coaches was, yeah, we have those thresholds. Bigger thresholds, though, is do you want to be great? And it's like getting in the interview with the guys and seeing if they have that demeanor necessary to compete and to go up to the next level. Yeah. Like that was what Tobin brought up. That was what Martin Mayhew brought up. That's what Tepper brought up. Like all these guys have that same version of we go here to the combine to sit down with all these players that are on our draft board and really identify who's going to come into the room and say, I am willing to do whatever it takes to get better in the league and progress forward. Because that's what separates the relative athletic scores and these little things that you have in your Excel sheet from the people who are great and the people who aren't.
Yeah, the humans. I absolutely agree. Did you Hyatt's just such a hard guy to comp to the league. Did you even attempt to figure out who you think he could be?
I did not have a great comp for
I couldn't
Hyatt.
think of one either.
I'm looking at my notes here. No, I mean, there's Corey Coleman I wrote down just off the route tree alone, and then like John Ross, but like he's not even that fast. Like it's tough. Like he's very skinny. I worry about the weight, right?
Slender
176 pounds.
Yep.
That is scary. Like weight does not get brought up enough in wide receiver evaluation. I think the last time we talked about it this much was probably when Devontae Smith was being drafted, and he himself had to be an outlier, but he already was. That I think is always important in this conversation. Devontae Smith has to be an outlier to succeed in the NFL. What has he done in college football to prove it? Won the freaking Heisman, was absolutely dominant in every game he played, beat some of the best cornerback competition that any flight of receivers have ever taken. Do you have that? Can you have that same conversation with Hyatt? Can you have that same conversation?
He won the Biletnikoff, and they hit him behind the line of scrimmage for most of his season. So it's like, they didn't want people touching him, maybe because he's not all that big.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. We went to our top 4 here, right? So I agree with you that I think there kind of is a gap here, and we get into the top 4 guys. It's the ones that if any of these guys are going in the first round, it's maybe these 4. So who is the least of the top 4 guys for you?
Wide receiver 4 for me is Jordan Addison.
Same thing. Same deal.
He for me is the guy that I'll be. I talk about guys I'll be beating myself up for being too high on. He's the guy that I might want to come back and wish I was lower on because the weight concerns. It's very rare you see guys of his size and his speed come out. I was on a podcast recently with Mike, and they're like, what about Isaac Bruce? I was like, Isaac Bruce was playing in the league when the cornerbacks were small. Everyone was smaller. The league was less physical. Like, when you go watch Isaac Bruce highlights, this guy's jogging out there and dusting kids wearing number 45 at corner. Jordan Addison's entering a different league. And he is going to be, if he's put on the outside, beaten to a pulp by some of these bigger, more physical, more explosive corners that we have in today's NFL. Addison, to me, yes, really talented. Look at his production, right? His production at USC specifically, like they were moving him around the line of scrimmage all the time. Crossers, screens, drags, all the shallow stuff, get plays after the catch. Is that what you want in the first round? Are you drafting a guy that you're going to have to scheme touches and all that stuff in the first round? I just don't know. And yes, I have him as wide receiver 4, very, very talented receiver. He's a guy, though, that I find myself easier to talk myself out of him than it is to talk myself into him. And that at a certain point, it's like, maybe I'm looking, if I'm considering Addison, say, with the Chargers at 21 or in that range, do I consider another position? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, no, we're totally on the same page with him. He's the one that there's too many folks that I respect who are high on him for me to really tank
Exactly.
his stock. Like when Daniel Jeremiah is out here talking about how he's his favorite receiver in this draft, I'm like, I don't know how to reconcile these things because I don't understand how you can love this guy from the first. Okay, what's his size? Okay, how fast is he? You've lost me already. You've lost me already on this guy. And yeah, the tape is better than what you see on paper for sure. He's a nice route runner, right? I think he can be a high-end number 2. Under no circumstances is this guy going to be your wide receiver 1. He's not going to be your X, I don't think. And his play strength was something that left a bit to be desired for me. But you know, he won the Blitnikoff 2 years ago. He's a crafty guy. If you want to use him as your flanker only guy that is just going to be your crafty route runner under the middle, I'm not sure how much you're going to get after the catch. Like I'm with you where I struggle to find a lot of reasons to think there's a huge upside with him. And I can think of a number of things where I could say this just may not work in the NFL.
There are people who've thrown comparisons around for him. I've seen Calvin Ridley. I can't get on board with Calvin Ridley. Maybe
Daniel Sanders. How about Sanders?
Sanders is a more crafty too. Like I'm like,
yeah, Sanders is like an 85% comp for him, like a 90%. I don't see it happening.
There's a world where this guy's D.D. Westbrook, okay? And D.D. Westbrook, if you're a part of draft Twitter as long as I have, D.D. Westbrook was getting hyped up like the next freaking coming of Christ when he was coming out of Oklahoma, and then comes in small at the combine, doesn't test, and you're like, oh, okay, still buying myself into him. I'm still talking myself into him, and then he gets in the NFL, and like size is a concern. You have to keep him touches, and here we are. Like I worry. That's what's going to happen with Addison. Now, I think that there are high-end comps with Addison where you're like, oh, that's maybe what he could be in the NFL. How different is this 5'11", 173-pound receiver that runs a 4.5 to Tank Dell, to Trey Tucker, to Tyler Scott, to Darius Davis, all these other guys, Josh Downs? How different is it? How different is he? Because he's going to have to be. When I look at this draft class and I see just a treasure trove of guys who fit the same athletic profile. He's more productive, obviously. I think that his tape is the best of any of the small guys, which matters. I know it matters more in a lot of ways.
Right.
But again, he's going to have to be a lot different than these other guys, or else we're going to be looking back at the draft class. The Vikings took Jordan Addison at 20 whatever, and then Tyler Scott was there in round 3, and their production is very similar. That's the concern. You don't want to be looking back at this draft and saying that.
Yeah, no, okay. So we're left with, I agree with you, and we're left with the top 3 guys here, according to many. It's Quentin Johnson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Zay Flowers. Of these 3, who is the least amongst them in your eyes?
I have Quentin Johnson as my wide receiver 3.
And we're on the same page. Agreed. Yep.
The concerns I have.
This sucks. I hate that we're so on the same page about this. Makes for awesome radio.
The concern I have is the same concern everyone has. The separation, I think, is a little bit concerning.
Inconsistencies, drops. Yep.
I think that Duggan was not very good, and you'll see like some
don't
catching
say.
Stuff.
Yeah.
like you'll go and I went back. I had Renner texted me. He's like, "How much of Johnston's drops are just Duggan throwing ducks?" And I was like, "You know what? Let's go back.
Go
back and watch it."
Fair question.
And you look at it with the lens, and these are probably rose-colored glasses for Quentin Johnston.
Mm-hmm.
But look at it in the lens. It's like how on target is that ball? And time again, you're seeing Johnston having to adjust dramatically to go get this football. And yeah, maybe they're cleaning off his hands, but like.
In a way, we're kind of giving Zay Flowers a lot of credit for the things that we're knocking Quentin Johnson for, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, Johnston, there's likelihoods where he becomes an awesome pro, right? I mean, he is someone that lives up to this first-round status. I do worry, however, not getting elite speed, not getting elite suddenness when I'm chasing the receiver position, when I know that's what wins in today's NFL. What wins in today's NFL is you have to be extremely fast and have to be your 10-yard split and your explosiveness and all that stuff has to be top of the line if you're going to be a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 in the NFL. Even your big bully boys like A.J. Brown are speedy guys, types that dominate with the ball in their hands. I just don't know if you have that with Johnston. It'll be interesting. He's a guy, again, he's my wide receiver 3. I'm high on him. I like him. I think he's a first-round player, especially in this year's draft class. Can I talk myself out of him? Yes. In the same way I can talk myself out of Jordan Addison, it's kind of very similar.
I agree. You have to be high on him in this class because he's really the only guy here at the top who can be a true X if he hits his ceiling,
Yes.
right? Like this guy can
Yeah.
be your breadwinner at the edge of the line and is just going down and torching teams if he pans out. But I'm with you. I'm not sure if the speed is there. I'm not sure if he just, I just don't see that gear necessarily on tape that I want to see. That gear that you see AJ Brown throw on. Sometimes you're like, oh, that, I don't know where the 4.5 speed is there. Like that looks a lot faster than that. These cornerbacks are not catching him. And from a route tree perspective, it's fine. It wasn't great. That's a great point. And I hadn't really considered the fact that, yeah, we do knock Quentin Johnson a little bit for a lot of things that I think may be Max Duggan induced, whereas Zay Flowers is out here doing incredible things along those same lines. And we give him a lot of credit for it. But at this size, you have to be a huge fan of his. So with these last two, I'm going to guess you're the same as me. Do we go Zay Flowers, JSN here to end?
I have JSN 1, Zay Flowers 2.
Yeah, same deal. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
so let's talk Zay at 2. Dare I say his top end comp, Antonio Brown? I kind of see it on tape.
I'm not
just
there.
a little.
I
see it on tape a little bit. I see it on tape a little bit.
And I won't.
Okay, all right.
I can't. Antonio Brown, you got to go back and watch the Antonio. I mean, this guy was just the 5 years before all of it went down and the trade to the Raiders and all that stuff. You could argue were the best 5 years of any receiver in the league. Like he was banana land.
Stuff.
And I just don't think you have that. I can't do it. You know, it's like when people comp to Megatron. You're like, just you got to stay off of it.
Yeah.
Maybe
fine,
you can think it, but you can never say it out loud. I think that's where I'm at with it.
Let me say this. Maybe the reason why Antonio Brown at his side on paper worked so well in reality, maybe the same reason why Zay Flowers on paper works much better in reality. I think that his skills work in that way a little bit. Who is your comp for him?
I have floor. It's KJ Hamler. I think KJ Hamler is the floor. Like what he'll be at his worst, right? And I think at his best, I not at his best, but like the middle likely comp,
most
I have
average.
Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett is where I went, and then
which is
the
a
high
good
end
player.
Probably exactly, and then T.Y. Hilton. That's why he's my wide receiver too. Like I had T.Y. Hilton up there at top.
This draft class is the best thing that's ever happened to T.Y. Hilton, like since his prime, because every single team is wanting their shrimp receiver from this class to be T.Y. Hilton. Yeah,
I think. The reasons, and I'm going to go to my notes here. The reasons I like Zay Flowers is that there is this necessary dog that you have to have when you are that small to win these 50-50 balls and win in competitive, contested situations. And if you don't have that, I'm already putting you in a tier with other receivers that are your size. The other reason is I think he's a very fluid mover, smooth, and has the competitiveness over the middle of the field to survive hits. The worry is, and I've written about this, I've tweeted about this, sub 30-inch arms. There's only been one receiver in 10 years that has played outside receiver and had over 800 yards in a season that has under 30-inch arms at outside receiver, and that's Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson is a generational deep threat. Generational outlier. I don't think Zay Flowers is into that tier. Other receivers that even come close to that all have over these 30-inch arms. I think that for me, even if he's a slot only in the league, right? Maybe you play him at outside receiver, but maybe more than 50-60% of his snaps are in the slot. That's where it starts to make sense that it could be like a Zay or a KJ Hamler type in the league, where you love what you see and you're so excited by this small, fast jitterbug, but it's so hard to stick him at outside receiver and see him be pressed. Now, if he can figure it out, that's how you get to become Tyler Lockett. That's how you get to become a T.Y. Hilton, is you find a way with your size limitations, with your arm length limitations, to be physical enough and long and competitive enough to beat these guys out. Zay is awesome. The tape is phenomenal. For a team that is willing to say he could be a slot guy only in the league, that's the team you have to take him. But a team that's maybe pot committed to trying with outside receiver and that doesn't end up working out and they're slow to play him in the slot, that's where his development and the situation could lead to just underwhelming results on a pick that I think can work out played in the right spot.
Austin, we got to get you out of here, but not before we talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is, according to most, the top receiver in this class. He's another guy who it's a lot of projection based on what we saw from him a year ago. And the last thing we saw from him when he was really healthy was he went thermonuclear in the Rose Bowl and put up, 17,000 yards on 16,000 catches. Yeah, the dude's incredible when he's incredible. Really, the only concern besides some size limitations is the fact that, he missed an entire year with a hamstring injury. Not the greatest way to start out, lead into your NFL career. But what are your thoughts on him?
For me, he is the guy that if we fast forward 5 years, we'll see has the most yards. That to me, I think he has, and like obviously you have the injury
just
this past year that
production
sitting out. But if/when he's healthy enough to average 12 games played over the next 5 years, or even 13, 14 games played over the next 5 years, he is going to be the guy that is the most productive. I would bet a lot of money on that because he's a bucket getter at both areas of the field. He can play inside and outside, and reliable hands, probably the smoothest hands in this class. Someone that I think you see comparisons to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been awesome, obviously, for the Detroit Lions this past year. That's the kind of player you're getting in him. And that, in my opinion, when you look at money downs and you look at just chain movers, has a ton of value in this league. Is he the burner you need to field stretch and all that stuff? Maybe not. Is there a range of outcomes where he's Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson? Probably not. But could he be Amon-Ra St. Brown for your team, and then you add around him
that's the
Jalen Waddle types and all that stuff? I think so. And that, to me, is enough in this wide receiver class where there's 1,000 reasons to talk out of some of these guys. With Jackson Smith-Njigba, you're going to have to fight me to talk me out of him because I'm there with him. I want him on my football team. If we don't have his skill set already, he can be a redundant skill set. If you have a lot of, you already have your bucket hitter, you already have your Amon-Ra St. Brown, or even in the world where you already have your Justin Jefferson, who's getting a lot of the same routes that Jackson Smith-Njigba would be getting. But most offenses don't have that guy. Most offenses, when they're on third down, they're looking for their star number one on the outside that's getting bracketed and double covered, and don't have this guy in the slot or don't have this number two type that can go get your first down. And I think for me is why I really, really doubt Jackson Smith-Njigba was on the board, after the top 20 picks. I think he's a legitimate, top 15 type of player.
No, I agree entirely. Austin, we thank you so much for your time, dude. It's been awesome. We'll have you back at some point in the future. Is there anything you need to plug? Anything people need to go check out of yours right now?
Go to theringer.com, the Ringer YouTube channel, all of the podcasts that we do, the Ringer NFL show, the Ringer NFL draft show. We're going to all those things and just continue to read the Ringer. And from here, continue to listen to this show. The show is awesome. Love Easton Freeze. Love you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Bingo. Awesome. Thank you, man. Appreciate your time. And we thank you for being on the show. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you.